Hello, this is Carl Irwin with another Blender tutorial. This tutorial is going to center around the creation of a rig that can be used for rotoscope masking lightsabers. Not only the typical type of lightsaber that we're used to, the classic kind of looking one, but kind of a newer version that has kind of a destabilized, sparky sort of look to it. Now I made a blend file of this type of rig that I uploaded to BlendSwap recently. However, it was denied. They did not post it, and the complaint that was made was that the rig took too much setup in order to demonstrate what it did. I suppose that's a fair criticism because this isn't really a model in any kind of way. It's really a masking rig, and there's really no way to make it in such a way so that it's evident what it does just by opening it. So I'm not going to bother trying to tweak it or change it to put it onto BlendSwap for anybody. Instead, I'm just going to give you a tutorial here on how to build it from scratch, and then you can build it your own way, and then you'll have your own version of it to keep. So let's get started. First of all, we're using Blender 2.76b, the current one as of right now, the current version. And we're going to be using GLSL shading. So the first thing we're going to do is when we open up a new file, we're going to go to the shading options, and we're going to change it to GLSL. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to delete the default cube, delete the default lighting. We're going to go to the top view, and we're going to align our camera to view. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a plane, and we're going to add a few modifiers to this. So come over to the modifier stack, and we will add an array modifier, and we're going to increase the count to 3. So we should have 3 planes here. Then we're going to apply the modifier. The next thing we're going to do is go to the object menu, and we'll go to the transform option, and we're going to set it to origin to geometry, and that's going to move the origin to the center. The next thing we'll do is we'll go back to the object menu, we'll go to snap, and we're going to snap the selection to the cursor, which is still at the center of the default grid here, the default plane. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to tab into edit mode, and we'll go to the mesh options, and we're going to go to vertices, and we're going to select remove doubles. And what this will do is it will remove the 4 vertices that are doubled up from the array modifier. So now we have 8 vertices, and they're all connected, giving us one solid clean object here. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to select all of the 4 vertices on the left hand side of the model, and we'll go back to the mesh menu, we'll go to vertices again, and we want to find the option for hooks. So if we find the hook option right here at the bottom, we're going to select hook to new object, and what this will do is it will connect all of these vertices to an empty in the scene. If you look over here at the scene, you'll see that there's an empty there. Then we're going to do the same thing on the other side, so we'll select the 4 vertices on the right, and then we will do the same thing. We'll go to the mesh menu, go to vertices, and we will select hooks again, and we'll select hook to new object. So now we have 2 empties in the scene. Each empty is connected to each side of our model. So we can tab out of edit mode at this point. We're going to select the empty that's on the left. We're going to rename this empty. We're going to call it 01 base, B-A-S-S, and then we'll select the other empty. We're going to call this 02 tip, T-I-P. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to set some restrictions on the transform. We're going to set some transform locks for each of these. So we'll go to the tip that's already selected. We're going to limit the Z location so that it cannot be translated in Z space. We're also going to limit the X and Y rotation, so it can only be rotated on the Z axis and moved in the X and Y axis. So we're going to go to the base, and we're going to do the same thing again. So turn off the Z. location, turn off the X and Y rotation. We'll go to the plane, and we're going to turn off the ability for the plane to be selected. We'll get rid of that, and we're going to go to the name here. We're going to call this Saber Core, and we'll add a new material to the Saber Core. We want the intensity to be all the way up to 1 and the color to be completely white, and we're going to make it shadeless. At this time we should also change our viewport shading to texture so we can see what that texture looks like. Again, we're using GLSL shading, so what we see is what we get in the viewport, and we're going to be using the OpenGL buttons actually to render our mask. So instead of using the internal render buttons over here, we'll be using the OpenGL buttons that you see down here off of the viewport. And again, we have it set to the internal render engine, although we're not going to be using that. We'll just be rendering using the GLSL game shading. The next thing we're going to do is add a couple of modifiers to this object here, the Saber Core. So go to the modifier stack for the Saber Core. We'll collapse our hook modifiers here. We're going to add a subdivision surface, and we're going to increase this all the way up to 6, which is the maximum amount. And this is subdividing our geometry down so that we have kind of a curved edge on either side. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to scale this down, but we're not going to scale it by selecting the geometry. We're going to select the base and the tip together, these two empties here. These are going to act as our controls for our lightsaber. So we're going to use a 2-point control so that we're going to manipulate our mask using only 2 points by translating them on the X and Y axis, and also by scaling them or rotating them in certain ways. So let's select these 2 points, and we're going to scale them down nice and small. Then we're going to take the base, the one on the left, and we'll translate it over on the X axis to the left. And then we'll select the tip and translate that over to the right. So this is essentially our lightsaber. Now at this point we can change the shape of it if we like to. We could go to the base side, and if we want we can flatten this out. So the way we'll flatten out the edge is we're going to select our local transform tools. So right now by default it's set to global. We're going to click on local, and we're going to select the scaling tool, and we'll select the x-axis, and we're going to scale that in. You'll see what happens is it flattens out this side. So from the side view connected to the hilt, as this will be rotoed over a blade, a physical blade from video, we want that edge down here to be flattened against the hilt. Over here on the tip, we'll select the tip, and we'll actually scale this down fully. So usually when you composite lightsabers, there's a little bit of a graduation to it. It gets smaller out at the tip. Depending on the type of saber that you're rotoscoping, you might want to increase the scale on the x-axis of the tip to make it more pointy, or to flatten it out. Whatever the case may be, you can come up with your own type of look for whatever you're trying to mask. So that's pretty much it. This is the basic essence of the lightsaber mask. A couple of other things we need to do, some housekeeping things for compositing later on and for rendering out our mask. We want to set the world background to black. And whenever we render this out, we're going to render it probably at 50%, maybe even less, 40%, somewhere in there. Because we're only going to be rendering one item and not a full scene, and because it's going to be kind of small, it's not going to be very big and take up a large amount of the scene, we don't need this to be full resolution. We can use lower resolutions so that the file size is much smaller, easier to use in the compositors, either in the node compositor, in the video sequence editor, or the compositor of your choice. And also because if we render like this, let me turn on the only render and world background with the black here. When we render using OpenGL, it will do a little bit of anti-aliasing, so it'll soften up the edges on our mask. So that will also be a little bit helpful in compositing as well. So anyway, this is how we generate our mask. Let me show you very quickly how we translate this mask around before we move on to the next portion of the tutorial, where we create some different looks for this and also look at maybe using this in an actual video file. Very basically, the way we're going to move this around is we'll select both the tip and the base. We can rotate it on the Z-axis into position based on our footage. We can scale that up, smaller, bigger, depending on where the distance is in the scene. We can also move the tip and the base independently with the local controls to change the size or length of the lightsaber blade. If we want to, we can create a number of effects with this two-point translation control. If we rotate it on the Z-axis, move it over to the upper right-hand portion of the scene, of the frame, if I select the tip, I can scale this up and I can generate what looks like a perspective kind of shot, in that it looks like the lightsaber is coming towards the camera. So with that kind of control, I can change the tip here and give it quite a bit of a stylized look in very different kinds of perspective. Another thing that I can do is we can use this to cover a wide range of motion blur. So if we were to act as though this is a moving blade, that is, it's moving laterally, we would want to be able to mask out all of the range of motion that's blurred. So instead of looking at it in a perspective view, we'll pretend that this is moving, but we don't want to have this rounded edge. We want it to be flat. So what we can do is we select the tip and go to our local scaling, and we'll scale in on the x-axis so that it is then more flat. Like this. And let's say that the blade is moving not only in this motion, swinging motion, but also in a lateral view on the x-axis. We could rotate the tip to match whatever motion the lightsaber is moving on. Again, we can flatten out this scale any way that we want to. So a whole lot of control here in this file and in this rig that you can use to rotoscope lightsabers. So two-point control, a base and a tip using two empties. And if you turn on your automatic keyframing, you could easily keyframe in this rotoscope mask for lightsaber blades that you can then render out and use for compositing later. Quick thing about masking out your lightsaber blades from obstructions in your scene. What we can do in order to obstruct the view of the lightsaber, let's say it's passing behind an individual or a person or another object, the easiest way to deal with this is to just add other pieces of geometry to the scene, such as a UV sphere. Because there's no lights in the scene, we don't need to create any kinds of materials. It's not being lit, so it's automatically black, and I could scale this on the y-axis, for example, and I could use it to mask out whatever might be in the way there. I could duplicate this and move it over. I could scale things so that they match whatever geometry basically that I need to. And when I turn on only render in the world background, now I have a mask that's been created that I could use, and I could keyframe these objects throughout the scene just like I'm keyframing the lightsaber blade. So masking is very, very simple. I would then render this out, my whole animation. Then I could use this in a compositor later on to add blur and add color and then composite my lightsaber blade. So that's how we build the file. That's basically masking. We'll look at some other specific techniques, also some texturing and some deformation that we can create to achieve that newer looking lightsaber blade in the next part of the tutorial. This portion of the tutorial, we're going to focus on materials and texturing for our lightsaber mask. There is a different kind of lightsaber that we're trying to achieve here besides the typical mask. We want to try to create this distortion effect. So we need to create a few materials and textures in order to create that effect on our lightsaber mask. Because again, the goal is to be able to mask our footage with one mask using 2-point control, the tip and the base of the lightsaber, using the various transform tools available to us, the scale, rotation, and whatnot, and translation. But then to take that mask that we make, that basic mask, and then apply some very basic changes in materials and distortion to create the effect of the newer type of lightsaber that we're seeing in the movies coming out now. So let's get into this. We're going to make a few textures and materials. One thing you have to do is that you need to, it's easier at least I should say, to enable in your preferences an outside image editor. So I use GIMP, so if you go to the preferences, you can enable under File, enable an image editor to load automatically to edit any images externally. So again, I use GIMP, you can use Photoshop or whatever you like to use. Blender seems to play very nicely with outside applications, at least in this aspect. So let's make a new scene. This is going to be somewhat of a throwaway scene. We're not going to hang on to this. We're just going to use it to make a couple of images. I'm going to add a camera, and then I'm going to move the camera up in Z space so that we can see our default grid. Look at the camera view, move it back a little bit further. And I'm going to change the resolution of the camera to 720 by 720. So we're going to make a square sort of image, and we'll move the resolution all the way up to 100%. We want to also make sure that GLSL is enabled. When you create a new scene, you'll have to re-enable that. And then we're going to leave it set, our viewport shading set to texture view. We want to create then we're going to create a sphere. So I like to use icospheres personally. I think that they're a little bit easier to work with. We're going to move our subdivisions up quite a bit. Actually, let's take it back down again. I think by default I had it at 6 subdivisions, which should be sufficient. And then we want to also set this to smooth shading for later on. I'm going to enlarge my sphere, scale it up. We want it to almost fill the frame, so it should fill it out, maybe just a slight margin on the edges. We're going to add a material to our icosphere, so add a new material. This is not going to be a shadeless material. We're actually going to use a light. We want the material to be completely white, so we'll increase the intensity and bring up the color to totally white, and we can get rid of the specularity. Now I'm going to add a lamp. I'm going to use just a point lamp to the scene, and we want to move it up so that it is then casting light onto our sphere. I'm going to move it up in Y space, away from the center of the sphere, and probably move it back on Z space a little bit. And the goal is that we want to cover about just a little more than half of the volume of the sphere with light. So we leave kind of this crescent looking shadow underneath. And on the light, I'm going to turn up the energy to 2. We'll double it, because we want to get absolute white in here, at least in some portions of the sphere. I might even bump that up again, 2.5. So until we get this kind of an image. Then we want to set our render output under the shading to render transparent. And we're going to render out a PNG image from here. So this is the image that we're looking for. We'll turn on only render, world background. And then we'll render using the OpenGL buttons one image. Then we're going to take this image, we want to save the image, and we will save our image, put in a new folder here. We'll call this folder Saber Textures, and under that we'll call this the unstable texture. You could see I had that in there already. I'd done this before. And we'll save that image. Now, I'm not sure why, but it seems like in the current version of Blender, when you save an image, it doesn't seem to demonstrate that is what the image is that is loaded here. It still has a rendered result. So what you need to do is load that image back in again. So under Saber Textures, Unstable Image, so we're looking at that image. And then if we go to Image and we click on Edit Externally, it should open your external photo editing software. So it'll fire up GIMP 2.8 is what I use. Some of you may use Photoshop or some other type of image editor. And once our image is loaded into GIMP, we're going to duplicate this layer. You could do this again in your photo editor. We'll select Duplicate Layer. We're going to duplicate it again. We'll turn off the top layer and select the second layer. And we're going to go to the Layer option, and we're going to scale back the layer. We'll set it to %, and we're going to scale it to 75%. So we'll scale that, and then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take this layer and we're going to transform it. We're going to flip it vertically. Then we'll enable our top layer, select the top layer, and we're going to go to Layer, and we're going to scale this layer as well. We're going to scale it to 50%. And then we're going to merge down our layers so that we have one layer. And this is essentially the texture that we're going to make. I like to add a quick Gaussian blur. Just the default 5 pixels is sufficient enough to get rid of some of the hard lines in there. And then we're going to export this. We'll export this as unstable texture PNG, or in GIMP you can select overwrite, and it will overwrite that original image that we started with, which is an easy kind of way to save it. We're going to make a couple of more images here. So what we want to do is we will delete this layer, or we'll add a new layer first, transparent, then delete the original layer. On the new transparent layer, we want the back to be black, so we'll fill it with the foreground. Then we're going to select our selection tool over here, the free select tool, and we want to make a core kind of image. Now, if you recall, in our original Blender file, the base was on the left and the tip was on the right. If we make our images so that they match that positioning, we will be able to very quickly add these textures to our original Lightsaber model, our original to our roto layer here. So we're going to put the base side on the left, the tip side on the right. We want to have somewhat of a graduated center core here. So what I like to do is I like to select this side, and then we move down here, and then we're going to select all of the bottom edge. So we've masked only one side of our core, like that. And we're going to fill it with the background color, so white. And if we select none, and we will duplicate this layer. And the top layer we're going to transform, we'll flip it vertically. And then I'm going to select the top edge from about the middle up, and we will delete it. So we will get rid of that. And then we can merge down this top layer. The last thing we'll do is we'll use the blur again, Gaussian blur, and we will blur this about 20 pixels. Try that. Actually, let's make it about 50. We're going to export this. We don't want to overwrite. We want to export this one as, we'll call it Saber Core. And we'll export that file. Now we need to make one more file. So what we're going to do is we will add another layer here, transparent layer. And on this top layer we're going to use our free select tool again. We're going to select up very close to the edge here at the top, and we want to create a mask at the very top edge that sort of follows the contour of the rest of the core, this kind of form here. We'll fill this with the white color, And then I'm going to duplicate this layer. From the top layer, the duplicate, we're going to translate or transform, flip it vertically. Then on the bottom layer, we're going to fill it with foreground color to make it black. Try that again. Select none, edit, fill with foreground. So now we have this looking image. We're going to merge these down. And then we're going to add another Gaussian blur. And actually 50 is probably good enough. We'll just leave it at the default 50 pixels. Just like that. So we're ending up with this kind of image. We're going to export this one as Saber Edge Mask. Export. Then we're going to create one more image. Let's make another layer. And we'll take our background layer and we are going to fill it with the foreground color, make it black. And on the top layer, we will take one of our brushes here, take this circle brush with a gradient fall off, and we're going to flip our color so that it is white. Turn on the paintbrush tool, increase the size. So we want to just about fill the screen, and we will put a couple of spots on here so that we get this kind of sun-looking view. And we will then save this out. Actually, let's merge this down, and let's put a little bit of a color on it. We're going to change the color balance a little bit. So let's move up the red channel a little bit, and move up the green channel, and move the blue towards yellow. And we'll do the same thing with the highlights. Move up the red channel, green channel, move towards yellow. And then the shadows will move up the red channel quite a bit. Green channel, move back to yellow. So we get this halo-y looking kind of orange spot. Maybe move up the red a little bit more. So something that looks like that, kind of like a sun-looking glow. And we'll export this as, we'll call it Saber Flare. And we're done with GIMP, so we can just close out the program. We can also delete this scene that we had created. We're going back to the original scene that we had with our lightsaber. We're going to turn off the only render and the world background options. Also, we want to make sure that other settings are correct. We want it to render out the sky now, so we don't want this set to transparent anymore. Set that to sky in the render options. Now what we want to do is we want to add some kind of a deformation to our lightsaber. So what we're going to do is we're going to add, let me snap our cursor back to the center, and we're going to add an empty plane axis, and I'm going to call this empty distortion control. And we're going to animate this figure here. So we'll go back to frame number 1, and we'll move this empty down away from the plane and Z space, about as far away as the camera is. And we will hit I, select I, and we will input a location and rotation keyframe. Then we'll go ahead maybe about 100 frames, and we'll move this up in Z space about to where the camera's at. And I'll hit I again, and we'll input another location rotation keyframe. Then we're going to go to the graph editor, and under channel we're going to select extrapolation mode, and we're going to select linear extrapolation. So what it's going to do is it's going to make a forever, an infinite curve here that this object would follow. So if we were to continue going on in time, that empty will continue moving. Okay, we're going to disable on the distortion control the ability to see it or to select it, so it's going to be hidden from view. We'll go back to the camera view. We're going to select the Saber core, and we're going to add a new material. The first material that we created on the white one, we're going to call this Classic Core. I'm going to add another material, and we're going to select Classic Core for the second material, and I'm going to disable this here. We're going to click on the 2 so that it becomes its own user. We're going to rename it again. We'll call it Unstable Core. And then we're going to add another material in here, and I'm going to select a Classic Core. And the reason why we're doing this is because we're only ever going to use one material at a time, and we don't want it to get rid of any materials when we save that are being unused at the moment. So just as a safeguard, we'll keep multiple copies of these materials in here. Now the top material will be the one that's always in view, the one that's always being used. So let's go to this top one, and we'll select our Unstable Core, and we'll go to the texture slots. We'll add a new texture, and for this texture we will navigate to our Saber textures, and we will select the unstable texture, and we're going to set this to normal mapping. Then we'll go to the next texture slot, and actually let's call that, let's name that texture, we'll call it Unstable. On the next texture slot, we will add another one. We will navigate to our images, and we're going to select the Saber core. And for mapping, we're going to select Generated. And it should automatically apply it from left to right because that's the way we created our model here. And we're going to set the mix mode to Add. Then we're going to go to the next slot, and let's name that actually. We'll call this one Core. And then the next slot, we'll add another texture. And we'll go to our Saber textures, and we'll select Edge Mask. For this one, we will also select Generated. And for the blend mode, we will select Subtract. So that will be removing the edges. Then what we're going to do is we're going to, with our Saber core selected, we're going to go to the Game Engine. And we're going to go to our material settings, and under the Game Renderer, under the Game Engine, we can select for the Alpha Blend Add. So what that will do is anything that is white or light will be added to the frame. Anything that's black will be transparent. Okay. And let's select something else to see if you can see that in there. There's kind of a gray color. Now what we need to do is we need to use our normal mapped unstable texture to give us kind of that ripply look. So what we want to do is on the Saber core, we'll go to the modifier stack. We're going to add a displacement modifier. And under this displacement modifier, we're going to add a new texture. We'll select the texture slot. And we want this texture to be clouds. If we go back to the camera view here, you can see that we see this blocky looking texture going on. If we select our Saber core again and go to Tools and we set that to Smooth Shading, go back to our camera view, now you can see this kind of zebra-like looking print on there. Underneath on the Saber core and underneath the displacement modifier, we're going to change the coordinates from local to object, and the object that we're going to set this to is our distortion control empty. So if we go back to our camera view, we can see these very fine ripples. Now what we want to do is we're going to find a frame in here And we're going to enable our distortion control so we can see it. Should be kind of right in front of the camera. We'll select it. We're going to scale this up until we get a ripple effect that looks appropriate. So maybe something about right here. So now as we play back, if I enable the only render in the world background, as I play this back, you'll see that we get kind of this rippling effect going on in our lightsaber, giving us this distortion. So what we've created is we've created the ability for us to render out this kind of distorted looking lightsaber mask from a mask that we already had. And that makes it a lot easier for doing roto work. You can rotoscope using the classic mask to cover everything and then just enable a few settings. We turn on the distortion under the saber core. We turn on, enable this texture here, this displacement modifier. You can disable it by clicking on the eye and it takes it away, and also by changing our primary material to unstable core. So to get back to the original, we click on classic core for the material and just go to the displacement modifier and turn it off, and now we're back to where we were with the classic looking saber. And to turn it back on, we click on the displacement modifier, go to the material, and we turn on the unstable core, and then we have our unstable looking mask. So you can play around with the settings with the scale of the distortion control and whatever the case may be until you get it exactly the way you want it to look. So in order to complete the look of the saber mask, we want to also add a particle system. So what we're going to do is we're going to select our saber core, and we're going to go to the particle settings. I want to make sure that we're in the internal render engine, because you cannot add particles while in the game engine. We'll add a new particle system. And actually, before we do anything with that, we want to change some settings in the scene. So we're going to go to Gravity underneath the Scene tab. So we're going to set the Z to 0, and we're going to set the Y to -20. So the particles will be falling on the Y-axis. Go back to the particle settings here. We're going to increase the number to 10,000. We're going to set the start frame at -5 and the lifetime at 5. Random lifetime at 1. And we'll set the end frame for 250 to fill up the whole animation that we have. We're going to remove the normal velocity, set that to 0. We're going to set the Y velocity to 1 so that the particles will kind of jump upward. Some of them will, and then fall. And we'll set the random to 1. And we're going to set the object influence to 0.5 so that as our mask moves around the scene, the particles will follow along. We're going to set the Brownian force to 1 so that the particles jitter a little bit. And then we're going to use align particles, and we're going to have the length of the lines be influenced by the speed of their velocity. And we'll set the tail to 0.03, very, very low. And that's pretty much it. If we play through this animation now, you'll see that we have these particles falling off randomly, and as we animate later on, you'll see how they fit into the masking and the rendering of this mask. One other thing we might want to change here is that it helps if you set the emit from setting to volume rather than faces. So that's the particle addition to the mask. This is how we create this distortion effect. In the next portion of the tutorial, we'll show you how to use this, how to composite it, and then how to make it look really nice in post-processing. So that's the end of the textures. We'll also take a look at what to do with that flare texture that we created as well. We're going to use that for saber on saber hits, and simply we just would keyframe that into our scene and render it past by itself. We'll look at that briefly in the next portion of the tutorial. We're going to continue our tutorial series here with the actual rotoscoping and the exporting of our masks. And then we're going to look at the techniques for compositing, at least some techniques that I use. You can use the principles of the techniques for compositing that I present here to use in any compositor and you can use only those things that seem useful and throw out the rest if you wish, but I'll show you what I did to create at least one of the demo videos that you saw at the beginning of this tutorial. So the first thing is we'll open up a file here that's already been rotoscoped. There's nothing worse than watching somebody rotoscope. So we don't have 2 or 3 more hours to go here for me to show you how to roto a scene. So I'm just going to explain a couple of techniques here, show you the file and how to change the materials and the distortion so that we can get both types of masks, and then we'll look at the compositing. What I've done here is I loaded in a background footage, so I clicked on the background images and then I loaded in my video file. Now this is the original green screen video of the scene, and you can see here at the beginning we have the lightsaber blade, it's the piece of PVC pipe, 1-inch PVC pipe, and you can see that the mask is up here off of the frame. What we did is I have it set to turn on inside of the frame as I want the blade to extend. And then what I did in the final video is I masked out the blade, at least up until that point when the blade is fully enabled. So if you watch here as I play this back, you'll see that right here there's a couple of frames that in which the blade will first appear, and you see it's very short, and then in the next frame it doubles in size, and then the last frame it doubles in size once more. So this is 3 frames worth of extension on the lightsaber blade. So you could do that or do it in one shot, whatever the case may be, if you want it to extend slower or quicker. So we have a few keyframes that are right next to each other, frame after frame. Now if you look inside of the keyframes here, you can see that I didn't keyframe every single frame. Now I have a technique in roto masking in that I tend to play forward about 20 frames before I set my next keyframes. And I just enable the auto keyframing key, which is right over here, so that whatever move or translation or scale that you make using your 2 points, the base and the tip, that will automatically be recorded. Then I go ahead another 20 frames or so, and then I keyframe again, and then another 20 frames or so, about a second, keyframe again. And I do this until I get to the end of the animation. And then what I do is I go back and I go to the in-between points between my keyframes, and I keyframe again. And I work my way down until I get to a place where I have a relatively smooth moving mask, where there doesn't seem to be too many hiccups in most of the motion. And then what I do is I go into the places like right here where the mask is covering across the body, and it's taking quite a long quite a long distance in a very short period of time, and I keyframe every single frame as the case may be until I get a smooth animation. So you can see as we go frame by frame here, you have the tip out here and the base down here, and then we get to a point where the saber is covering the hilt entirely. So there's blur on one side and blur on the other, and you want to cover all of the blur with your mask. So I place it so that the base is here and the tip is here, and then in the next frame everything is corrected again. And the mask is actually flipped around from one frame to the next, but because we keyframed it within one frame to the next, we don't see any of that motion. It just happens. And then from there on out until I can get away with it, I don't have to keyframe every single frame anymore. You can see that there's a fluid motion about every 3 frames. So I found that working in this way eliminates the need for doing an overly large amount of translation, deformation, scaling, and rotation. Once you keyframe to a point where you have one keyframe every 5 or 6 frames, you find that as you hit the interim frames, really all you need to do is just move your points. You don't have to scale them anymore because you already have a keyframed kind of destination from 5 or 6 frames to the next 5 or 6 frames for scaling. So you see here the lightsaber base, the mask base is nice and round, and only about 5 or 6 frames later it starts to flatten out again until it's at some point going to be perpendicular to the camera again, and it will be flat here all the way at the end. So that's how I do my rotoscoping. You want to cover everything, including the blurred section. So if you look back here, let me find a spot where it's moving kind of quickly in a lateral motion. Like it doesn't move very quickly, but right here you can see what I've done is I took the tip and I scaled in the tip so it's flat, and then I rotated it so that it matches the motion, the blurred motion of the blade. So that's what you want to do. You want to cover all of the blurred area. We do not apply motion blur to lightsaber masks. We just cover all of the blurred area, and then that is essentially adding the motion blur. So this is how you mask it. Now, exporting this, what we're going to do is we're going to turn off our background image, and then we would turn on only render and world background. When I mask, real quick, actually, by the way, you can see I have these labeled for you, so you can see there's saber base down here, saber tip. When I mask, by the way, I find that it's easier to set the footage in the front and then decrease the transparency so that I can see through the footage to the mask, because you want to be able to see both things. I find that that's the easiest way to work. So I set the footage in the front, and then I just change the opacity of the footage so I can see everything. It's just a little point there if you're going to be doing rotoscoping from the viewport. When we want to export, we turn on the only render and the world background, make sure that our resolution is set properly. So I like to export at a lower resolution. This is one single element. It is not a full frame. And it's going to have a number of effects applied to it in compositing. It'll be blurred. It'll be covered up with blurred layers. There's going to be a lot of things happening to it. So I find that 40% is sufficient enough to render out. If I render one frame, you can see it 40%. Automatically with the anti-aliasing that Blender does, it will, create kind of a softer edge here. And then when you go to composite this in, you're not going to see any of this lower resolution artifacts going on here. It'll work just fine. So for the sake of time in rendering, and then also to keep down the lag in compositing, I render at much lower resolution. So once you've rendered out, you'll end up with an animation that looks something like this. Let's start this up. So the saber turns on, and then it moves around the frame, and that's the end of the animation. What you then can do is you can take that animation, that output, and take it to a compositor. So we're going to go to the video sequence editor. We'll use that for compositing here. So Blender has a couple of compositors. It has a node compositor, which is the more popular one, but it also has a video editor, a video sequence editor, which has a number of compositing features that will be sufficient for us. By the way, you can import masks from the masking tool inside of Blender directly into the video sequence editor, and I believe also into the node compositor. So if you're going that route and you're using the masking tool, Blender already plays very nice with itself with respect to using those masks in both compositors. What we're going to do is we're going to bring in that mask very quickly here. So let me pop it up. I'm going to drag and drop it in, and you can see this mask playing through here. And we're going to set our resolution way down to 20%. And then we're going to add a Gaussian blur effect. So we'll drop that on top. Now the reason why I bring down the resolution percentage is because we want to get the most bang for our buck out of this blur. The more pixels that are involved in this effect, the slower it runs. So I find that if you're using Gaussian blur, just decrease your resolution to start with, and then you can get a little bit more out of the blur effect with less processing power needed. We're going to set the Gaussian blur on the x-axis to 10 pixels and on the y-axis to 10 pixels, and we'll get this kind of an image. Then what I would do is I would name this, I would call this, let me see here if we have it, we'll call this blur A, so classic mask blur A. And then I would render this out as an animation. You'll see how quickly this renders. So that's one frame. So it's not even a second per frame. So this pre-rendering happens very, very quickly. It's pretty efficient. So I would render all of that out. I'll show you what we're going to do with this in a moment. The next thing I would do is I would set my resolution down to 10%, cut it in half. We'll set our pixel blur up to 15 on the X and Y axis. That gives us this kind of a blur. I would render this out as blur B. So this would be another animation. And again, you can see how quickly the frames render, very, very fast, especially with a smaller resolution. Then I change it one more time. I'm going to take it down to 5%, very, very small, and we'll set the blur amount to 20 pixels. Again, these numbers are arbitrary. This is just what I set them to. You can come up with your own method for blurring. You can use the node compositor or just use the blur node that's in there. It works fairly quickly, frame by frame. This is just my technique I'm sharing with you. And then I would render this out as blur C. So again, this renders extremely fast now that we're down at low resolution. So what you end up with is these three videos. You have blur A, you can see that, and then you have blur B, which is slightly larger, softer blur, and then blur C, which is larger yet and softer. Now, the reason why I bother doing this is because I think it gives us a little bit more definition of the lightsaber in compositing. You could, if you want to create a glow, just do one blur that's kind of in between, larger. And then just composite that one blur on top and call that your saber glow. Or you could add a glowing effect if you have a pre-made effect in your compositor. But I find that adding a little bit more detail by compositing three separate layers just makes it look a lot cleaner, a little bit more realistic. Once we've done that, we're going to get rid of the Gaussian blur effect. We'll bring our resolution all the way back up again. And I'm going to move my mask layer up. And then I'm going to bring in another video. I'm going to bring in my back plate. So if I go to where my back plate is at. Now this has already been green screen composited. So what you're looking at here, if I disable my mask view, you can see my back plate. This has had the green screen applied to it already, and I've been placed, this is me here with this prop, into this scene, and I'm not going to go over how to do green screen compositing. I will mention that I actually did the green screen composite directly from the viewport, and I have a tutorial on my channel as part of a series of tutorials called Hacking the Viewport, where I discuss this method. So if you want to find out how to do very quick green screen compositing or keying, you can check out that tutorial series and find that tutorial. But I've already had this pre-made, and you can see that the garbage masks as part of that process have cut off the lightsaber in a few different places. So the blade is not really going to matter. If you want, you could even mask that blade out if you want to take the time to do it. It gives you a cleaner plate if you're using green screen. If not, you probably wouldn't bother masking out the blade. You just want to make sure that your mask covers the blade entirely. So this is the footage. This is my mask. We'll turn it on. I'm going to drop on top of this my three blurred layers. So we'll take blur A, we'll drop it on. We'll grab blur B, we'll drop that on. We'll grab blur C, we'll drop that on. Now there's a few ways to composite this together. One way is to composite all of these layers to start with and then add a color adjustment. The other, more detailed way is to add a color adjustment to each one of these and then composite them together. We're going to take the shorter way right now. What we're going to do is we're just going to set each one of these blur layers to add blend mode. So the top is added to the second, and then that's going to be added to the third, and then the third is going to be added to the original mask. And in all lightsabers, you want the core to be white, and then the rest of the glow will be the color of the saber. So what we're going to do is we're going to take all four of these, the mask and the four blur layers. We can tweak the level at which the opacity exists on these. We're just going to leave it at the default right now and just use what we have. We're going to take all four of these, and we'll go to the strip menu, and we're going to make a meta strip. So it's going to collapse these down into one strip. Now we can color adjust, color grade this one strip. So let's say we want to make a purple kind of lightsaber. So what we would do is we would add a curves adjustment to our meta strip, and we would bring up the red channel, take down the green channel. That already gives us a purpley kind of color, and I might bring up the blue channel a little bit more to make it a little bit more purpley, less violet. So this is what we end up with, and we'll call this done for the purposes of this tutorial. Now all I have to do to composite this in is I go to my blend mode for the meta strip and I hit add. Now on my video I do a lot of other things such as color grading, and I add noise and I add the bars and a lot of other things. I'm not gonna touch on that. I'm gonna stop right there. We're just gonna cover this much because you can kind of get the idea. At this point, what I would do is I would then maybe desaturate my image a little bit, mess around with some of the color balance and color grade it for final output. But this is pretty much it. This is how you composite your lightsaber in. Again, you can take the time to add color correction to each individual blurred layer to make a very, very detailed kind of glowing effect. Or you can do this quick and dirty way. We'll just settle on the quick and dirty way for right now. You would want to render this out then at full resolution. The good news is that in the lower resolution footage, Blender up-converts lower resolution footage and does a little bit of anti-aliasing in the output from the video sequence editor. So a lot of those artifacts that you see from the lower resolution footage get smoothed out when you're using these kinds of blurred effects. So that's the first one. Let's get rid of that meta strip, and we're going to composite the other type of lightsaber. Let's go back to our original mask. Now, we already have the rotoscope work done. What we need to do is we need to convert this mask into the the distorted view. So what we'll do is we'll select the saber core. We're going to go to the modifier stack, and we're going to turn on, we'll enable that unstable texture that we had on there that was tied to our distortion field control, our empty. So I'll enable that. You can't see it right now, but it's actually wavy and distorted at the moment. Then we're going to go to the material setting, and we're going to change the material from stable core to the unstable core material, and that will apply all of the other texture layers that we had in there, including the kind of the eyelet texture that we made in GIMP, as well as the masks for the core in the center, and then the edge mask as well. And if I play this through, you'll see that this does distort quite nicely. It's giving us a very good effect without having to rotoscope this. The last thing we're going to do is we're going to apply our particle system. We'll turn that on. Now I've already baked this particle system, and I have it set for 10,000 particles starting when the lightsaber is fully extended. I found that if you begin the particles before the lightsaber is fully extended, if you're doing that in your shot, that it will shoot particles out as it's extending. Now, you might want that effect, but I found it looks kind of silly. So what I did is I start the particles at the point, which is frame 29 in this animation, when the lightsaber is fully extended. And then these particles will follow along as the lightsaber mask moves around, because the particle settings that we put on there allow it to do so. Then I would render out this mask, same way that I did the first one. I would set it to 40% or 50%, and then I would render out a pass that looks something like this here. So this is the unstable mask. And you can see all of our particles moving around, and we have that distortion field occurring. Okay. Then I'm going to follow the same procedure in the video sequence editor, and I would make blurred layers from that mask. So I would end up with a blur A based on that mask, so you get some of the distortion in it. I would get a blurred B, and then I would get a blur C. Now I found that with this mask, because there's less data in it, that especially the large blur is very, very light, very soft. So we might have to tweak that as we add it in compositing. So I've got my 3 blurred layers just like before. Let's go back to the video sequence editor and see if we can composite these together. So we'll go to frame 1. And actually before I do that, I'll get to that in a moment. I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let's add in these layers very quickly. So we'll drop the mask in. We'll drop in blur A. We'll drop in blur C, or blur B, and blur C. So we have all of these in there. Let's go to a frame where we can see them. This is very, very soft. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the multiply amount to 2. I'm going to double it so it's a little bit more filling, and we'll set it to add. And on the second one, we'll leave that one alone. We'll set it to add as well. And the third one, actually, we'll probably take the opacity down just a little bit, 0.9, because we want to see the detail on the edge of our mask. So we'll set that to add as well. And now we have our mask with all of the edge effects and the particles flying off there. We will grab all 4 of these, and we will apply a meta strip. And now we can add a color grade to it, so we'll add a curves adjustment. And for all we know, this type of lightsaber is red and only red, so we'll turn on the red, take down the green. And depending on the type of red you want, you can add a little bit of blue to give it more of a pinky color or take some out. So we'll put it right about there. And then we'll set this whole mask to add mode. Now, this could be it. You could be done at this point like we were in the last composite. However, the lightsaber blade is a little bit wider than the actual mask. So we could leave it like that, and because it's a white blade, it's not such a big deal, but it does take away a little bit of that detail that we strive to make in the mask. So here's a trick that I used in this example. Something that I did is I created a slightly blurred version of this background image. Let me see if I can find that here. This looked like this. Actually, that's the next one. One second here. I'm getting beyond myself here. So it looked like this. It was blurred a few pixels. And I rendered this out very quickly from the video sequence editor. Then I took this into a 3D viewport scene, and I applied it to a mask. I just used the project from camera option to set the UV mapping. And then I applied a distortion effect to the plane, just like I did with the lightsaber itself. And I moved an empty through the scene to give me some distortion. And I ended up with something that looked like this. So you can see that there is kind of a distorted looking effect going on in the scene. So we're going to use this kind of as a heat distortion, and also because it's blurred, it'll be a bit of a mask to take away the existence of this prop in the background, so it'll be a little bit less noticeable. So what I'll do is I'll move the lightsaber above my blurred and distorted mask here. We'll move, actually let me do this very quickly. We're going to set this to no display so we can move our assets around a little bit more quickly. There's less rendering going on. Then I'm going to bring in one of my other masks. We're going to go to the classic masks that we rendered out. And I'm going to use the blur B of the classic mask. So this is the second blurred output from the plain roto mask. I'll drop that in. So this is what we're working with right here. Oh, forgot to turn my view on. There we go. Let me turn off my... So this is what we're working with. So I have this classic mask rotoscope layer, but it's the second blurred one. I'm going to add a curves adjustment to this, and I'm going to increase the contrast quite a bit. So I'll bring the whites in close, really, really tight, until I get a pretty solid white kind of core in the middle there that's larger than the lightsaber prop. Okay, so this is what we have. Then I'm going to encapsulate this effect with a meta strip. So I'll take that classic mask with the effect, that curves adjustment, and we'll make it a meta strip. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the metastrip off, and on my blurred layer I'm going to apply a modifier. I'm going to apply a mask modifier, and for the mask I'm going to select that metastrip that has the classic mask on it. So what we're doing is we're adding here that blurred, distorted kind of background piece just over where the lightsaber is at. Okay. Again, this is totally optional. I just came up with this idea to kind of make it look a little bit cooler because it looks so dangerous, this kind of sparky looking, distorted, unstable lightsaber. It'd be neat if it had some heat distortion in there, and this also helps to mask the prop. We're going to set now this unstable blurred mask here, mask layer, to alpha over. That mask will then be applied as an alpha over layer. So this is what we end up with. We have the lightsaber prop with its distortion is now sitting on top of the original background footage. Now, when I add my lightsaber mask back on again, you can see that it softens up those edges quite a bit, so we can see a lot more of the detail in there. And this, looks a lot better, looks more dangerous. You can see kind of looks like a heat distortion with that background blurred image going on. Then I would further composite this by adding some other effects like color grading, bars on the top, those kinds of color adjustments to make this look even better. Maybe some kind of grain or something, because this is a background image. It doesn't have any grain on it. Anyway, you know the drill in compositing, making your animations look good, your final products. But this is how you composite in these masks. So this is the technique that I came up with. Use it or don't use it, but that's how I built this whole structure, and this is how you can composite your rotoscope layers. One other quick trick I want to share with you. We'll go back to the default view. Just one last thing. We're going to turn off the core and turn off my only render view. I want to bring in, actually I'll turn off my base and tip as well. We want to import another texture that we made earlier, if you recall. Let me snap my cursor back to the center. I've enabled import images as planes. That's a good add-on to enable. And we're going to go to our textures, and you remember that we made this flare texture. I'm going to select that. I'm going to select shadeless over here, and we're going to import it. And we'll scale it up a little bit so we can see it. I'm going to go to the game engine, and I'm going to apply, not that you need to do this, but I like to do this just because it should be kind of a transparent layer. We're going to go to the material settings, and under the blend mode we're going to set it to add, so it would be added to everything behind it. That's probably sufficient there. I'm going to scale it on the y-axis to make it a little bit more elongated. Scale it up. What I use this for is those clashing moments. If you're compositing a lightsaber fight, you would do one rendering where I would have my background image here, where you would, and actually let me move it to the back. So we'll set our background image to the back so we can see everything. Turn the opacity all the way up. You would keyframe animate this plane in places where the lightsabers are clashing. So you would find the point where they intersect for that one frame. So let's say the frame before they intersect, I have it up here, and I would insert a keyframe. We'll insert a location, rotation, scale. And then in the next frame, when the lightsabers clash, I would bring it in where they intersect. Let's say there's another lightsaber right here intersecting, and you increase the scale huge, really, really big, and we would put another keyframe in there, and then in the very next frame we would scale our element back down and scale and take it back out again, and then we would insert another keyframe. So anytime you have your moments where lightsabers are clashing with each other, if I turn this off, background images, and we'll turn on our only render options. In that moment, you would have an asset that gives you a lens flare that you can then composite. So you would render a whole a sequence of your lens flare assets apart from the core blades from your lightsabers, and then you would bring this into the compositor. You would apply it as an add mode. You could change the color, whatever you needed to do to make it work. But this is how you would then composite your clashing lens flares when you're doing lightsaber battles and you have saber on saber contact. So there's the flare and then it's gone. You only need one frame. You do not need more than that. That's very important to understand, that more than one frame doesn't look right. It's only ever one frame whenever you see that effect being used. So that was the last thing I wanted to show you. One last little trick to work on your lightsaber videos if you're using Blender to do it and using this technique. So that's all I have for you. Hopefully I've taught you something. Hopefully you've learned something and you found something useful out of this. So I wish all of you happy blending.